Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. It's been a few weeks since I last uploaded onto this channel, and there's a few reasons for that. I've been working full-time, I've been in college, I think technically full-time, and also I had a minor medical emergency. Don't worry, everything's fine, but that definitely delayed things for me. But anyway, I'm back with another video. We got 8 albums to talk about today, all in mini reviews. As always, everything I say about these albums is just my own personal opinion. So don't take it all too seriously. You know, everybody has a different opinion. It's all subjective. I'm not pretending to have all the answers about objectively how good or bad these albums are. But if you ask me, here we got some legitimately great albums, some pleasant surprises, and at least one big disappointment. But anyway, let's start things off on a positive note with... Alright, this is the 5th studio album by this band whose name is so long that I don't feel like saying it, and I recently decided to listen to their first 4 albums a few times each. And their 2013 debut was arguably my favorite, with a lot of emotional lyrics about trying to grapple with change and the passage of time. And their dreaming sounds continued onto their sophomore album, which might be just as good as their debut. Now, unfortunately, 2017's Always Foreign wasn't as much up my alley, even though Dylan and Her Son is a great song. And 2021's Illusory Walls had some good moments, but also just felt mostly underwhelming. But I was actually quite surprised that this band went quite a bit heavier on this new project, where at points I almost felt like I was listening to a totally different band. Honestly, this album has passages of metalcore and punk, although it doesn't totally sacrifice the shoegazy, dreamy sounds of their previous albums that this band has been known for and has gotten so much critical acclaim for. And you know what? I'm actually kind of surprised just how much I ended up liking this. It's a kind of bleak, borderline apocalyptic album that might take a couple listens to fully click, and even then, it won't end up super catchy and may not be super memorable in terms of individual songs, but when you let the entire experience wash over you, oh boy, this is heavy. Not just musically, but also because of the content and the way the band tries to let the horrors of the world sink in for the listener, including chilling moments like Oubliette, where the simple lyrics convey so much emotion and such a strong message without even saying much, where we get the sharpest, most haunting moments in lines such as, "I don't want to learn that this is real. I want to have forgotten." Fuck, that's a perfect example of a simple line that still feels so goddamn potent and haunting, saying so much with so little. And look, I don't know what the exact meaning of every line is on this album, nor do I know what each song was written about specifically. There is a lot of mystery, and they're intentionally not making this easy to figure out, but that's the point. The band wants to make you think and carefully consider your actions and the ways in which we might all be contributing to society's downfall, while also realizing that art like this can only do so much, as people are killed violently every day, global warming continues to threaten humanity, and even people who are among the more fortunate, like myself, and probably the band as well, but I don't want to assume there, are unsure of the stability of that status. And look, I don't say that to undermine the acknowledgement of bigger issues, but it is worth mentioning as part of the truth, especially to explain why an album like this resonates for me. We're all a little selfish, and we need to be. But even beyond all that, the instrumentation is hard-hitting, the drums sound great, the guitar work really encapsulates the vibes this is aiming for, and the musical progression of the album leads to an experience that needs to be heard to be fully understood. And even then, I feel like there's more going on under the surface that even I'm not fully reaching. And sometimes that can improve an album for me when the musical execution is so spot on. Look, this is the sort of album that I'll probably need to sit with more before I can have a full opinion on it, and I will need to see how my opinions on it change and evolve in the coming months before I have more to say about it on my list of my favorite albums of the year. It's pretty much inevitable this will be on that list, only a question of how high. The album's less than 45 minutes, and it's one of those cases where an album feels longer than it is because it packs so much into that short runtime, and in this case, that's absolutely a good thing. I mean, it sucks how much of a shit show the world has become, makes the band name quite ironic, but if art like this is going to help us get through... Look, I'm not sure how much change this will actually make in the grander scheme of things. Probably not much, sadly. But fuck, I needed this more than I could have imagined. This is one of the best albums of 2025 without question for me. Very strong 8 out of 10. I could have given this a 9. It is that good. You're not going to hear anything like this year. It's absolutely fantastic, and I highly recommend you check it out. Again, one of the best albums I've heard all year. So this is the 4th album by the Beths, a band I've never really been much of a fan of, and while their 2022 album was better than I originally gave it credit for, it still felt to me like a mostly generic alt-rock album that didn't really have any strong standout tracks on it. Not the worst thing ever, but very inessential, at least to me. So here we have a new album in which the title's meaning becomes very apparent on the opening track, which I actually really like lyrically, describing how self-improvement isn't a straight line and you can fall back to places you wished you never would. And these themes actually continue a bit throughout the album, even if subtly, such as the attempt at feeling something on No Joy, or the beauty of stability and also flexibility on Roundabout. And there are also some moments that feel more unrelated, but also have some real lyrical strength, like Mosquitoes, written about Oakley Creek in Auckland, which flooded in 2023. But a lot of this album kind of fits together to recognize that some things change while others remain the same, and it's got a sort of lightheartedness to it that I can't deny. And you know what? I actually think this mostly works, at least more than I was expecting it to. I'm not going to say this is amazing or anything. I still don't think the Beths have a particularly unique sound, and I don't find Elizabeth Stokes to be a particularly captivating singer, and sometimes the production can get a little messy. But hey, at least the heart and soul feels more noticeable than on Expert in a Dying Field. Now, on a bit of a side note, the U2-esque guitar is certainly an interesting choice on the closing track, and I'm not sure it totally works, but at least it's different for the Beths. I don't know, this album has the feeling of the kind that might go off a lot harder live than on record, but with most of what I've heard from the Beths previously, they just didn't seem like a band that had that much to offer at all, at least for me. Now, unfortunately, despite some good songs on this album, I don't think it's going to have a lot of replay value for me. The melodies aren't super strong, and again, it very much feels like a Beths album, which to me just doesn't feel all that unique. But it is kind of a cute little album that I can understand the appeal of more than I was expecting. And hey, I'm curious to see what they do next. So in the end, I'll give this record a 6 out of 10. It's decent, maybe even pretty good, but not great. However, compared to a lot of the basic radio rock you'll hear on alt stations, I wouldn't mind hearing more of this instead. It's just a shame I don't think that'll happen for me because I'm in Canada where I don't think the Beths are all that popular. But I don't know, I haven't listened to alternative radio much at all recently, or any radio really. Either way, this was better than I expected, and it's got some solid tunes on it, I'll admit. For that, I'll give them credit, even though most of it I'm probably going to forget fairly quickly, just being honest. So 2 years ago, the Beaches made one of the biggest Pleasant Surprise albums for me that year. Because while their 2017 debut, Late Show, did have the great single T-shirt, the rest of the album just felt really bland and didn't do much for me at all. It's really not that good of an album if you ask me. And yet, in 2023, they embraced their wilder sides so much more on Blame My Ex, which led to some of the most memorable radio-ready indie rock songs that I've heard in the past few years. That album was, and still is, legitimately great, and I was really excited to hear what the band did next. And I think the most notable difference between this album and Blame My Ex is that that album was more based on personal experiences of their lead singer Jordan Miller. At least that seems to be the case based on a few interviews that I've seen, whereas here she took stories from the other band members and sung about them instead. And honestly, it's kind of hard to tell if you don't already know that, because this does kind of feel like we're getting a lot more of the same fun, lively energy with very open queerness and also being honest in a lot more ways, some of which can get kind of messy, but that's also the point, and it's why I love Blame My Ex. And honestly, when the formula works so well, I can't really complain about getting more of the same, because I think this is pretty great too. Not only does this album have punchy drums and guitars, catchy hooks, and more great vocals from Jordan, but it's another album that highlights the messiness of human emotions and the ways that our worst aspects can come to life in rough ways, but there's empathy all around, and enough self-awareness to keep this feeling light and strangely joyful in a weird way. And on top of all that kind of introspection, we get songs like Lesbian of the Year, a more serious song that represents a healthy realization of one's true self, written about band member Leandra Earl's coming out, which happened at an older age than one would usually expect. And it's a reminder that we're all learning more and more about ourselves all the time, regardless of how long we've been around on this planet. And while I can't appreciate moments like that one and other more serious moments on the record, it's the Beaches' sense of humor and willingness to completely give the middle finger to lyrical norms and sometimes give the middle finger to themselves in such an empathetic but also self-aware fashion, which really makes me love this band. It might not be for everyone, it's absolutely front-loaded, and I'm not totally sure it's better than Blame My Ex, but it's certainly close. Great album, this was a lot of fun for me, and while I thought Blame My Ex might be a one-off, this proves they're still on the right track. and I can't wait to hopefully hear the Beaches reach even greater heights in the future. Either way, I gotta give this an 8 out of 10. I'm really glad we got this. Great record, tons of fun. Highly recommend you check it out. Alright, so how do I even talk about 3 Days Grace? I recently listened to all of their albums multiple times each for whatever reason, and this band hasn't been decent in about 2 decades now. Honestly, the only reason I was at all intrigued by this project was because of the return of their original frontman, Adam Gontier, who was with the band for their best material in the early to mid 2000s, but this band pretty much started to turn to shit even before Adam left the band in 2013. So I'll be honest, while I was a little bit intrigued, I still had no expectations this would be particularly good. And, well, this is better than the past few 3 Days Grace albums, but that's really not saying much, because I don't think this is particularly interesting or memorable for a lot of reasons, including a lack of strong hooks, a lack of identity, and also the fact that this just feels way too reminiscent of a style of hard rock that I got way too into back in the day before I really discovered my music taste. And I'm actually kind of embarrassed about that time, albeit in a way I can kind of laugh off. And it feels to me like 3 Days Grace are trying to recapture their early days. I mean, I can't really blame them. It makes sense considering Adam's return to the band. But I just don't really think it works in moments like Mayday, in which the bass line sounds basically like a copy of Animal I've Become. And honestly, while I like that this album has a bit more energy than their previous few, or at least based on what I remember, as of when I'm filming this, it has been at least a couple weeks since I listened to those albums. I just don't find this album particularly compelling, and it often falls into very generic territory. It's the kind of album that I would have absolutely eaten up as a 16-year-old, but nowadays I'm just not impressed. I've heard so much heavy music that's better than this. But whatever, I like some of the melodies on Dominate. Kill Me Fast has a decent chorus. The guitar boosts the title track quite a bit for me. Adam brings some good intensity to Death Wish. The Power has a bit more experimentation in the instrumentation, at least compared to the rest of the album. But none of that means this album is interesting or noteworthy in any way. And especially when so much of the production lacks the power or punch that this should have, at least if it could cover up for the mediocre writing. Well, I'm just wondering why we even need an album from 3 Days Grace. I mean, they seem excited about it, and I'm happy for them, but just for the general public, is this really going to be satisfying? I don't know, I guess you tell me, but I personally just don't really care. I can't appreciate the attempts at relatable lyrics about the daily struggles of feeling like you're faking everything, or feeling like an outsider, or just struggling with surface-level life challenges. But really, I'm just trying to find positives on an album that feels like another basic, recycled rock record that we're probably all going to forget about very soon. I guess it's inoffensive enough that I can give it a light 6 out of 10, but even that feels like I'm being nice. I've been excitedly waiting for a new Wolf Alice album ever since their 2021 release Blue Weekend, which I personally consider to be easily their best album. But I didn't want to set my expectations too high for this, considering that album was a big shift stylistically from the alt-rock, borderline grunge sound the band was known for, going toward dream pop and other adjacent genres, with only a few full-on rockers. And I wasn't even sure exactly what I was hoping for coming from this band, considering the diverse styles they've attempted and usually pulled off quite well. And look, this album took quite a few listens to fully sink in for me, and even then, I do think Wolf Alice could use a bit more experimentation in their music, even though I do mostly like the blend of folksy pop music with soft rock that Wolf Alice present on this album. And you know what? I appreciate the ways this album attempts to capture the essence of time in a more figurative sense, looking back at nostalgic moments in the past while also looking ahead to the future and trying to see the beauty in it all. And toward the end of the album, Ellie Rousel seems to be singing about her eventual death in Midnight Song, and it seems to me like she's trying to feel like she'll still be a part of this world after she's gone, which feels like a very fitting moment toward the end of the record, especially before finally feeling more at peace on the closing track. And honestly, this album kind of feels like a new beginning for Wolf Alice. I appreciate that we get more vocals from Joel Homme. Even though I think that Ellie Rousel is a fantastic lead vocalist, Joel is still a great fit on White Horses, and it was nice to hear him get more chances to shine behind the mic. And the emphasis on the mellower moments and the pure beauty of the sounds on this record also really stood out to me. Less huge grandeur and more subtle prettiness. To quote a song from Blue Weekend, extravagance disguised as elegance is boring. And I think Wolf Alice know that, which is why this album feels so subtly gorgeous. And once again, when you have such an amazing frontwoman behind the mic in Ellie Rousel, that's going to get you very far. It only further helps that the melodies are beautiful, the production sounds gorgeous, and the songs flow into one another really well too, creating, in my opinion, a great full album experience. I am still curious what would happen if they thought outside the box a little more stylistically. This does still feel very indebted to a sound, which I think has been done a lot better by bands like the Beatles, and I feel like so many other bands who I just can't think of off the top of my head. But yeah, I guess that proves it's not too derivative. So yeah, 8 out of 10, great album. Probably not in the absolute top tier of albums I've heard this year, but still absolutely worth hearing regardless. So after recently listening to the Aces' first 3 albums, I've got to be honest and say I'm unfortunately not the biggest fan of this group. I don't think they're terrible by any means, but I'd really call all of their albums only decent, including their 2023 album I've Loved You For So Long, which I wrote about in my blog a few years ago. There were a couple really good songs on that album, but none that really blew me away, and I unfortunately just didn't have the highest of expectations for this album. But that being said, I had a little bit of hope considering this band's sound is the kind of music that can often really appeal to me. Glittery, upbeat pop music with a hint of sadness, sort of in the vein of acts like Hachi or Muna, maybe a little bit the Japanese House or the 1975, even though the latter of those I'm not a fan of at all. So I was hoping they'd show some serious growth on this album, building on the potential of their 2023 album, and unfortunately I actually think this is probably their weakest album to date. I wasn't expecting them to go backward, but this just did not click for me at all, as much as I hate to say it. And really, it's not the kind of album that's even worthy of a lot of discussion from me, because really the biggest issue for me is the lack of strong hooks, and the fact that despite being an attempted fun dance album, it just feels dull and lifeless. There's no real energy here. Yeah, I like the self-confidence and the lyrics of songs like Jealous and the title track, but it's met with the most unconvincing vibes of the instrumentation to even come close to selling its messages. And this is before the writing takes a turn for the worse on songs like She Likes Me, where the narrator seems way too obsessed with showing off her partner to the point of obnoxiousness, and honestly a kind of self-importance that goes beyond a healthy kind of self-love into a feeling of pretentiousness, and it feels more like a relationship that's more based on self-validation than love. And yeah, that's human to some extent, but the writing here is just obnoxious. Look, I don't know if this is about a real relationship or not. If it is, then as long as they're happy together, who am I to judge? But it doesn't make for a good song. Especially when we get the lines about, "No more details, you perv," and "I know you wish she gave you that attention." You're the one giving her attention and making people curious because you won't shut up about how lucky you are. I mean, hey, at least she's honest about her ego on the next track, but that's met with probably the worst hook on the album. And when the production feels so hollow and lacking in punchy instrumentation, where the bass lines often sound too quiet and the drums are usually either clunky or underpowered, well, that mixed with Crystal's vocals just not really wowing me as much as the best moments on previous The Aces albums, and the annoying interludes which are trying way too hard. Yeah, this was a real disappointment for me. The Magic and Twin Flame have a bit more life to them, but even the best moments here are not great. I'm gonna have to give this a strong 4 out of 10. Here's hoping the Aces can go back to making decent music on their next album, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. In the meantime, I don't think you're missing much if you skip this one. So I'm gonna skip talking about all the controversy surrounding Sabrina Carpenter, because most of it is just misogynistic bullshit from people who are mad at Sabrina for making sexually charged music, album art, etc., even though she's a grown-ass adult. As long as it's her decision and she isn't being pressured by the label, there's no issue with it. And it reminds me way more than it should of the backlash Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion got for WAP back in 2020. Holy shit, that was 5 years ago. Where the fuck has the time gone? Anyway, I absolutely loved Sabrina's acting in the Disney show Girl Meets World, playing arguably my favorite character in that show, in large part due to the acting being so phenomenal. Although, I will take this opportunity to say that that show was nowhere near as good as the original Boy Meets World from the 1990s. That show is an absolute classic that I fucking love for so many reasons I could go on and on about all day. But back on the topic of Sabrina Carpenter, well, I'm not very familiar with her first few albums, and for time reasons, I decided to skip over them before just revisiting her 2 previous albums before this one. And while I do think Short and Sweet was probably a little bit better than I remembered it being, I still don't think Sabrina's music is really for me, and she's probably a better actress than she is a musical artist. But I also don't think this album is as bad as some people are making it out to be. I will totally admit I'm not the target audience for Sabrina Carpenter's music, and that's for my own unique reasons, which I'm not going to get into right now. But come on, this isn't that bad, is it? Now, I don't think the writing is particularly strong, and it does often feel a bit more try-hard than it should, where the attempts at quirky cleverness don't really land in my opinion, like how she wishes for her ex to never get laid because she's still bitter about their breakup on the song called Never Getting Laid, the over-the-top ridiculousness of When Do You Get Hot, or just so many of the individual one-liners and double entendres all over this album. But again, there are reasons why these might just not be landing for me, and I will absolutely acknowledge the bias here. Again, I'm not going to get into why. I feel like I should be careful about how much I reveal about myself personally on this channel. My point being, this might not be bad as much as it is just not for me. But again, I'm surprised this is getting so much hate from critics who I would otherwise expect to be way more into this. Now, I noticed immediately when I heard Busy Woman that it sounded basically like another Good Luck Babe by Chapel Rowan, and honestly I was accidentally confusing the opening track and lead single Manchild for Busy Woman, the latter of which is not even on this album. And it's because Manchild also sounds a lot like Good Luck Babe, and while I don't like it as much as Good Luck Babe, it is still a pretty solid opening track for this album with some nice glossy production. And I actually quite like a lot of the melodies on this album on songs like Nobody's Son and House Tour, and the production on this album is quite strong. I don't always love Sabrina's singing, but it is effective in the right moments, especially some quirkier tracks like House Tour, and she can definitely sell a good melody. Yeah, I could go on and say a lot more about this album, but I'm in a time crunch and I'd rather just simply say I think this is honestly about on par with Short and Sweet. Maybe I like it slightly less, but it's pretty close, and I'll give this a 6 out of 10, the same rating I'd give that album. I don't love this, but some of these tracks could end up growing on me. I guess we'll have to see, but I don't think this is a bad album at all. So I'll admit that until recently, it had been a long time since I'd last revisited Dragon New Warm Mountain I Believe in You by Big Thief, one of the most critically acclaimed albums of the 2020s thus far, and what may end up eventually going down as one of the most critically acclaimed albums of all time. And part of this is because when that album came out 3.5 years ago, my 17-year-old self had such a strong negative reaction to it because I borderline hated that album. A disdain which, in retrospect, I can tell had more to do with the huge waves of critical acclaim, which I just didn't understand, rather than the album itself. Because I have grown and matured enough to the point where I can realize in retrospect, the album is not bad. In fact, there's a lot of really pretty guitar playing, and at times very thought-provoking imagery in the lyrics, and a sense of rawness in the performances that I have to respect. And I think pretty much everyone can agree that Simulation Swarm is an excellent song, and I include myself in that. But the majority of the time, I'm just not really a huge fan of Adrienne Lenker's singing, and a lot of the songs feel very undercooked, and that becomes a much bigger problem when the album is nearly an hour and a half. Yeah, in my opinion, there were other wildly overrated albums among the most critically acclaimed albums of that year, including some that I'm risking getting a lot of backlash for. Ants from Up There, The Forever Story, Black Midi's Hellfire, and that Always album, or Always, however you say it, Blue Rev, that album that really soured on me. But all of those albums are at the very least legitimately really good, some of them legit great, despite not fully living up to all the hype in my opinion. But those albums are a conversation for another day. In fact, so is Dragon New Warm Mountain, even though I will mention that that album just really did not work for me at all outside of a few scattered moments, and might be the most overrated album of that year that I heard. But what I am here to talk about is Double Infinity. Yeah, I was gonna go through all of Big Thief's albums before this one, but I've been way too busy. So anyway, how is this album? Well, I think I might like it more than Dragon New Warm Mountain, but that's more because it's shorter and not as tedious and difficult to sit through all at once. Because I don't think this has the same kind of standout tracks that that album did. Simply in terms of the number of songs, this is less than half the length of its predecessor, only a little bit more than half the length in minutes. And honestly, I think the best songs are the almost sentimental Subtle Rocker Los Angeles, the uniquely pretty title track, and the very catchy Happy With You, which I don't think is too much of a stretch to call disco folk. And those are all very good songs, maybe even great, but I'm not sure if they quite live up to some of the best moments from their 2022 album. Now, the production on this album is kind of messy, I'll admit, which I don't think fully complements the attempts at rawness that the songwriting is aiming for. And yeah, I could see how some people might see it the other way around, where the lack of refinement could make it feel more real, but it's just harder for me to focus on the storytelling and the lyrics when the whole thing sounds so cluttered and weirdly noisy for a folk album. Now, this isn't always a bad thing. I'm still not totally sure what I think of Adrienne Lenker as a singer, but often her unique vocal delivery can fit with such industrial sounds, especially on a song like the title track, which paired with its lyrics full of unknown desire that's like a mystery to be solved, is probably my favorite track here. Overall, I did mostly end up liking this album, but I don't think it's going to have a lot of replay value in the long run for me. Maybe it will with individual tracks, but even that is hard to tell. Still, I'll give it a solid 7 out of 10 because it does sound quite well. It sounds kind of messy, but the mixing is mostly good, and I do like the ways most of the instruments are produced. I would definitely recommend this album, especially if you like their 2022 record. But if you're looking for songs that are going to be hard-hitting, catchy, and easily sticky and memorable, well, this might deliver, but I wouldn't set your expectations too high. Alright, thank you everyone for watching this video. Hopefully I'll be back soon with more mini reviews and maybe some individual reviews. There's quite a bit that I'm working on that I'm hoping to get posted fairly soon, but where's the time? You know, I've been working full-time. I've been in school, again, technically I think full-time, at least quite a few hours a week. And yeah, there's not as much time for reviewing albums as I would like there to be. But anyway, I'm going to be working on more stuff soon. Hopefully I'll get some videos posted fairly soon. Hopefully I'll be able to review as many albums as I'd like, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, thank you for watching. I'll be back soon, hopefully soon, with more videos. I'm really awkward at ending these videos, whatever. Anyway, thanks for watching.